All right, everyone. Thank you so much for your time in attending this webinar. As you must be aware, this webinar would run for about 1.5 to 2 hours. And the topic of this webinar is to introduce you to the upcoming technology and web development, which is progressive web development. So my name is Sai, and if you have any questions that you want to talk about, you can ping me in the chat anytime. You can interrupt me anytime so that we can discuss a few more details about it. Okay. Now, just a minute. So I've been working with Acadgild for a good amount of time, and this is the first webinar, of course. So this is a brief introduction about Acadgild, and today's agenda is actually to make you aware of what exactly is a progressive web app. How does progressive web app differentiate itself from a general web application? What is the difference? What are the backlogs in a general web application which your progressive web application is trying to cope up? Okay, so we'll look at a brief introduction, and we'll look at why exactly do we need the progressive web applications. And then we'll look at a couple of use cases. What are the characteristics of a progressive web application? And we'll look at what is the technology stack that comes under progressive web app and any logistics. And then we'll create a simple application. Now, the target of that simple application is not to exactly give you a working output, but it is to walk you through exactly how you could relate things to make that a progressive web application. So what exactly do you mean by a progressive web application? So a progressive web application is the one which is going to take an advantage of the upcoming technologies, which include the ones from web and mobile applications. So you can imagine a progressive web application to be an application that is essentially built by using web technologies, but it feels like a mobile app. So when you talk about progressive web applications, what are the things that come into picture? The most important enhancement or the most important API that is used when you deal with a progressive web app is the service workers. I'll talk about service workers in a moment by the end of this session. You have the caching and the push APIs, which have actually increased the use of, or which have actually led to the development of something called as progressive web apps. Okay, let me just share a whiteboard and explain what exactly do you mean by a progressive web app. Now, let's imagine that there is a specific web app that is coded in some random technology. Okay. Now, what the user would do, he would open his browser and then go to this web application by keying in its URL. Okay, the user is in your control, or the user's resources are in your control only till the time the user is viewing your application. Once the user is out of this application, or even when he's going into a private mode, he is no longer your user. Okay, so the user has ended his session. Now, let's think about mobile. What does a user do to use an app or to access your application on the mobile? Okay, so I'm not talking about the web app. I'm just talking about any random mobile application. Let's say Twitter. Okay, the first thing is your application has to be put on Play Store or Apple Store or whatever, Amazon Kindle Store or whatever it is, whatever marketplace a particular operating system supports. Your app has to be put in that marketplace first. The second thing is user has to search for your application on that specific app store, and he'll have to install it, and then he can use it. Now, what is the advantage of this approach and what is the advantage of this approach? Now, in this approach, the major disadvantage, let's talk about that, is you cannot take advantage of client resources. For example, I could talk about the memory. the hard disk, something like that. Here, since it's a native application, right? I'm sorry about that spelling. It's a native application. You have access to all that. Okay. Now, yet another disadvantage of using a web application is a user is not connected. What does that mean? Once the purpose is solved, think about Flipkart. What did you do when Flipkart was launched? You went into their website, purchased something, that's it, came out of it. You didn't give Flipkart an opportunity to talk to you after you have come out of it. Then what did Flipkart do? They came up with a mobile app. Right? Now, what is happening in the mobile app? You did the same transaction. Right? You purchased, let's say, a book. Okay. Now, after you have done with the purchase, you receive certain notifications from Flipkart about their offers or about their promotions or some other things like that, right? You get these disadvantage, the notification advantage when you're talking about a native mobile app, right? So this is one way in which you are trying to keep a user engaged to your application, right? Now, let's talk about progressive. Okay, progressive applications are, as I said, a combination of web and native. Okay, how do I develop a progressive web app? Do I have to create first the web or the native? Yes. First, you will create a web app. Okay, so you use any kind of a library you want. So I'll assume, let's say first that I'm not assuming it. You have to create a web app first. So here you can use your Bootstrap, your AngularJS, your React, or some other D3, for example, or any other favorite library of yours. Okay, we are going to use something called Material Design Lite. It's MDL. Okay, it was first launched by Google, called Material Design Framework. So we'll use a lighter version of that called MDL. Okay, now after you are done creating this application, your user is going to his mobile device, and first thing, he's not going to his Play Store. Why? Because it's a mobile application. Then where does he go? He goes to his browser. Okay. Second step that he does, he accesses your web application by using his browser. So your page is displayed. Okay. Now, the third thing, the user with an interval of 5 minutes, okay, he revisits your web page. That means the user has come back. Okay, now your intelligent browser is going to show him a pop-up saying add to home screen. Okay, then what happens is this guy is going to be added to the user's home screen as an icon. Okay, now what is the next thing that happens? When the user clicks on this icon, it is not going to open a browser with that application. Rather, it's going to open a similar looking mobile application. Okay, the biggest advantage here is you are coding in a web application. You are not doing anything specific to the native. Right? Whatever you are doing it, you are using your web application. But the browser and the web APIs that you use are intelligent enough to display the web application as a mobile application once the user adds your web app to his or her home screen. Is that clear? Give me a yes if it is clear. Guys, is that making sense? Okay. Okay, thank you. Now, what is my progressive web applications include is it's not a specific API that you need to understand in order to use a progressive web application. Rather, it's a whole bunch of APIs and plugins that put together actually work as progressive web app. Now, why are you calling this a progressive web application instead of just a web application? Is the technologies that you would use or the APIs that you would use in order to implement a progressive web app are still under development as under the umbrella of HTML5. Okay, now you must have heard of the notification API. Now, these days when you go to a website, it gives you a small pop-up saying, can we send notifications, right? Once you allow that to set the notification, even if your browser is closed and there is something coming in, your Facebook does this, right? If there is something, someone has liked a picture of yours or someone has commented on your status, etc., you get a notification from Facebook on your desktop. Correct? That is something which is done by your notification API. You have caching. Now, storing the data on the client machine is something where there has been a lot of advancement. So earlier we used to use cache. We have session and local storage APIs now as part of the HTML5. We have IndexedDB, and we have some other options which I'll show you in the Chrome browser. Right now, once you install a progressive web application, the things that are going to happen is that the user is going to receive the push notifications, and the other major advantage is he can also work offline. Okay, we'll look at how does it happen. All right, now, why is that people are moving towards progressive web applications? Now, concept of progressive web applications was something which is introduced by Google in the year 2015. That was last year. And ever since then, people have been trying to implement their applications in the progressive web app framework as much as possible. Now, the problem that progressive web application is trying to solve is, on an average, any app that you create is losing 20% of user interaction, or it is losing 20% of users after the user first gets into your application and his ultimate usage. Now, he gets in, registers, uses it, and after that, most of the time, a user is not coming back to your website. So that is one reason which provoked people to develop something called a progressive web application. Now, to talk about certain use cases wherein your progressive web applications fit in, this is Amazon's study. Now, if there is 100 millisecond latency, it is going to cost anyone 1% in sales. Okay, so that means your applications have to be so fast that you cannot take the risk of even 100th millisecond of time. If you write an algorithm, or if you use an API that is, or if you use an approach that is talking to the server and fetching the results, and it is taking quite a time with the interaction, then there is it is highly possible that you are creating an ad hoc, or you are becoming a blocker in the progression of your in the advancement of your organization or whatever it is. Okay, now this is another estimate by Google, wherein it shows how much a broker could lose per millisecond if the electronic trading platform is just delayed by 5 milliseconds behind the competition. Okay, so this is how important the speed, the maintainability of the user, keeping the customers interactive with the application, or keeping the customers engaged, and at the same time increasing the speed and connectivity of your application is important. Now, these are certain case studies that you could find on Google's website. I'll just open one of each of them. The first one is about AliExpress. Now, AliExpress they implemented progressive web applications. And the result that they found is they had 104% of new users coming in, 82% increase in their conversion rates, and double the time of double the pages visited by the users per session, 74% increase in the time per session across all the different kinds of browsers. That is AliExpress. If you look at our own Flipkart, they have done a huge amount of business because of this progressive web application. They increased their conversions by almost 70%. And Flipkart was the first Indian company, or you could say the first e-commerce company that came up, that started using this progressive web application as soon as Google launched it. So they started using the progressive web application in the year 2015 itself. Now, when compared to AliExpress, which increased the page visits by 2x, Flipkart went ahead and they actually had they are one more step ahead of AliExpress, with 3 times the time spent by a user on their website. Now, if you are wondering where did, if you had actually interacted with the Flipkart progressive web application, the tool is called Flipkart Lite. So if you use your browser in order to go to Flipkart a couple of times, if you are using Android, there is a condition that between each hit, there has to be a minimum difference of 5 minutes. Okay, so after you visit your website for 5 minutes, you should typically see an application which shows add to home screen, and that is when you are actually engaging with the Flipkart's lighter version. Okay, so you can download this PDF case study for your information and go through what progress did they do as a result of using the progressive web application. And this is public, you can use that. It is maintained by Google. If you want to read more case studies, you should go to the 2016 articles. Yes, please. Sharjil Khan, can you, can you type in your query, please? No, it is not. As I said again, I'll repeat this. Progressive web application is not specific to a framework. It's an implementation methodology. So what I mean by that is, it's a combination of technologies. Okay, there is no one single framework. Like I'm not here teaching you AngularJS or Bootstrap, which are essentially a framework and a library. This is a methodology. So how do you use all that and internal HTML5 APIs like storage API or a notification API or some things like that to achieve a progressive web app? Okay, Rihant, this is the query. Are you able to see that? This is the query that was raised by Sharjil Khan. Okay, so we are not talking about a specific framework here. We are talking about a set of APIs. We are not even talking about a framework. We are actually talking about the application programming interfaces which are provided by and supported by your browsers. Make sense? Any more questions before I move on to the characteristics of a progressive web app? Okay, sure. Thank you. All right, now let's talk about the characteristics of a progressive web app. Now let's talk about the important characteristic which says progressive. Now, a progressive web app has to be progressive. Now, what do you mean by a web app has to be progressive? Is that your application has to support any device and it has to be quick enough in adapting to the changes in the technology. For example, if there is a new version of an OS coming in which certainly does not support some parts of your web application, you have to take care of supporting that as well. It has to take advantage of any feature that it could possibly on a user's device and the browser. Now, the second thing is it should be discoverable. Now, the question is, I said your application is a web application. It's not something which is available on a Play Store. If it would have been available on a marketplace like Play Store, then I can understand that, okay, somebody is downloading that application more frequently. So that is showing up in the search results. But what does discoverable mean in terms of a web application? Now, since it's a web application, it has to be optimized in such a way that your search engines should be able to predict the presence of your web application. Because it's basically your SEO, search engine optimization, that defines your discoverability of your web application. Now, what is meant by linkable is that your application has to be controlled by the state of it has to have a state which essentially you control it by using the uniform resource locator or URI. Now the other thing is, and this is the most important thing, it has to be responsive, because you don't know in which browser or in which device is your application going to be viewed in. It could be iOS, it could be Android, it could be any tablet device that you are not aware of, right? Or you might not have used that in your development. So your application has to be responsive enough to fit in to any device possible. The other thing is it has to have a behavior which is more native. Third, the other characteristic is that it should be connectivity independent, and more specifically, I'm talking about offline API. Your application should be able to work offline as well. The other thing is that it should be installable. That is, it should be able to get installed on the user's screen. Now, when you talk about safety, essentially, your application is prone to the man-in-the-middle attacks. Okay, that is because you are going to use something called as the service worker API. Okay, now service worker API is one such thing which could possibly give rise to a man-in-the-middle attack. Okay, so you have to be sure that you are using a HTTPS protocol when you are developing your progressive web application. Now, the technology stack that you use when you're dealing with a progressive web application, first let me talk about the terminology. When you look at your application, there are two things. So this is my application, okay? So this consists of HTML, this consists of CSS, this consists of the JavaScript, this consists of all the images, and this consists of what? Some videos, right? Some other things like that. Now, there are two types of resources that we have. One is the static resources. These are the resources which remain unchanged. On the other hand, you have some dynamic resources. Now, these are the things that you fetch by talking to your server. The unchanged resources are something that you call as app shell. Okay? In order to load this dynamic data, what you do is you create a template. Okay? Now, this template is particularly cached. It's put in the cache memory. Now, why do we use a template? It is used to populate your dynamic data. So let's say that I have a list of users coming in. Okay, I create a template which has name followed by some value, a blank value, age, for example, and let's say we are using his picture to be displayed. Okay, this is my template. Now what I'll do is I make a call to my server to fetch the list of users. Okay, I get a response. Say I get 5 users as a response. Now for each user, I'll iterate over the properties and fill the template with their respective values, whether the name, age, and the picture. Okay, what is the advantage? I am not downloading any HTML files from the server. Once you hit my application, I already got all the resources possible, and I put them in the client storage, in the client machine. Now, all the thing that I'm doing is I'm talking to the server to get some data. Okay, and what I mean by data, typically it's JSON format, or in rare cases, it's an XML. Okay, so it does not take much of your bandwidth to be transmitted over wire. Okay, Ankit, you have a question? All right, that's fine. Okay, that is what your template does. Okay, now apart from that, there is the technology stack that you would use. First is the cookies, but the problem is when you use cookies in your application, the possibility that they are going to be cleared is pretty high. It's not permanent. So cookies is a least preferred option. The other thing you have is a web storage, IndexedDB, and an app cache. Okay. Now the most important thing is your service focus. I'll talk about service focus in a moment. Okay. Now, the logistics is you can use this URL, which says ACD, which is the expansion, the shortcut for short form for your Acadgild ACD, PWA, Progressive Web Apps demo. It's a bit.ly link. It says bit.ly pit.ly Acadgild PWA demo to resource to access my Google Drive. Okay, so I have shared some files here which you can take a look at. Okay, so I'm going to create my application here, and I'll put whatever details I want. Whatever code that I'm going to write now would be here. So you don't have to worry about sharing the code. It is on my Google Drive. Now, the other things that I'm going to use are your favorite IDE. I don't have anything specific. So it's up to you whether you want to use anything which you already have in specific. I suggest using Visual Studio Code, and it's up to you, whatever editor you want to use. Okay, you can use Node.js because the advantage of using Node.js is you get a HTTP server with it. So all that you have to do is execute the command which says. So first you need to install Node.js. So how do you do that? I'm so sorry. Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so go to the Node.js.org. You can download the latest release, save it. I'm using Mac, so it's in a PKG format. After okay, now once you're done installing it, go to your terminal. See, the other thing is, just in case if you're not using a Unix-based machine, what I mean is specifically if you are using Windows, you need to have bash system that would help you run some of the commands. Okay. Now, once you're done installing Node, the other thing that you need to do is to install a module called HTTP server. Okay, use the -G option just to make sure that the installation is global and you can run that code from anywhere. Now, for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to use my licensed IDE called WebStorm. In case if you do not have access to WebStorm, you get about 30 days of trial version, so you can use that. And it's a good one. Whenever you run an HTML page. Okay, so what the advantage of using WebStorm is you get a built-in app server. So whenever you try to run a simple HTML file, it actually hosts that into its local server before it can send the detail. Before showing that onto your browser. Okay, so these are specific logistics that we'll need, and all that you have to do is, let's say, so I'm currently in the project files WebStorm, a project called project files WebStorm. Okay, so once your HTTP server is done installing, all that you have to do is type in HTTP-server. I'm sorry. Okay, so that would start a HTTP server running locally on your system. Okay, now you could go to your browser and type in localhost 8080, and that should show some application here. Okay, now I would be using WebStorm on my firewall. It is not allowing me to. Typically what happens in your systems, whenever you do a change in any of the files, let's say HTML file or any other JavaScript file, your HTTP server is intelligent enough to pick that change. But in my case, my firewall is not allowing that to be done. So what happens is I'll have to restart my server. So bear with me, I'm going to use WebStorm IDE. So in case if you want, you can download a 30-day trial version of WebStorm IDE. Okay, now to begin with, first, let's create the app shell. Now, if I reiterate, an app shell is nothing but the unchanged version of your application, correct? So let's create that app shell, and then we'll skip through the storage part, and then we'll talk about the service workers part, okay? So I'll start by creating a couple of files. Let's create a file called license, okay? And we'll have one more file called read.md or readme file, okay? And we will also create a file called index.html, which is going to be my primary file, okay? So I'll give this name called car deals. Okay, so I'm going to use this index.html in order to create the view for my application. All right, let's proceed. Okay, so I'm going to give it a title called car deals, and now let's include some metadata. Okay, now these things might not be so much of important when you are creating a web application, but in case when you're creating a progressive web application, every minute thing does matter. The meta tags, which are generally ignored by developers, play a huge role when you're talking about deploying this application into a mobile device. Okay, so I'll set the char set to UTF-8, and apart from that, I'll also create a viewport so that this would take the advantage of the width that is available to it. Thank you, Gautama, for that. Okay, so I'll say width is equal to device-width, comma, initial scale is equal to 1. Okay, so that it's completely zoomed out when the user first loads that screen. Okay, now in order to provide the compatibility for IE Edge, I'm going to add a HTTP equivalent called as XUA compatible. Okay, and the content that I'm going to give for this one is IE Edge. Okay, so that adds compatibility for my IE Edge browser. Okay, now for the purpose of visual appearance, it's up to you whichever library you want to use, but I'm going to use something called MDL or Material Design Lite. Okay, so you could go to getmdl.io and download this. The inspiration behind the material design, MD Lite, Material Design Lite, is from Google. So if you go for material.google.com, this is the homepage of the material design. The inspiration is to give you a UI library which is based upon paper and pen or pencil. Okay, so the colors that you see are typically abstract. Okay, so these are the designs that you have. So what you could do is you could download the Material Design Lite. If you want to explore any version or templates, you could do that here. So I'm just going to download it. Just a moment, please. Okay, so I already have that downloaded. Just to save some more time, I'll just copy that from my existing folder structure and I'll place it in a new folder here, which is called, I'll just create one more directory here and call it resources, and I'll just put everything in the resources. Okay, just a moment, please. Okay, I just brought in some more resources just to save some more time. Hold on a minute. Okay, so let me just delete this redundant path. Okay, now once that is done, all that we have to do is to link it. So when you go to your Material Design Lite, the icon file is because of a virus in my system, so you don't worry about that. I'm going to add in two things. See, I'm going to add in something called as material red indigo min.css. This is customized. When you download it, you would typically find the name to be material.min.css. Okay, and this is because I wanted a red and indigo colored theme, and that's why I downloaded this material red indigo min.css. Okay, when you download it, it would be a different color. All that you have to do is to link that here. And apart from this, there is also a script that is available, so you can attach that script as well. Now, again, I'm not restricting you to use this material design library itself. You could use Bootstrap as well, which is pretty much scalable. Okay, and also responsive. Now, one thing that I want to talk about before I get into further details is, do not use CDN. Okay, do not use a content delivery network when you are trying to set up these libraries. The reason is, when the service worker comes into picture, sometimes it won't be able to access your CDN resources. So caching those CDN resources would get a little difficult. Okay, now all that you have to do now is go to this directory. Okay, let me open the terminal here itself. Okay, so this is my terminal wherein my current project is deployed. So it says PWA start. Okay, so all that you have to do in order to start looking at the code is that you can type in HTTP server in that directory wherever you are, and you can see that it is starting at 8080. Okay, so you could go to localhost :8080 and it should not display anything. Okay, I think I already have one running, so let me do one thing. I'll kill that. Just a moment, guys. I think there is some other version running. Okay, that's fine. So let me, as I said, the advantage of using my WebStorm IDE is, see, once I hover over to my top right corner, you can see the browsers that I can support now. So if I click on Chrome, it hosts that file onto its local server, and it gives me a unique URL. So you can see that this is totally empty. Okay, now let's start adding body to this guy. Okay, so first I'm going to add a div, and so I'm going to add a class called MDN layout to identify this as a MDL component and material design line. So I'm also going to add one more class which is called as MDL JS layout. It's called WebStorm. Okay, I'm using an IDE called WebStorm. Okay, now MDL layout is going to tell my browser that this is an MDL component, and MDL JS layout is going to put all this content into another div whenever this is going to be rendered. Now, why do I have to do that? Is because just to make sure that my UI is not getting distorted because of some changes because of the device. Okay, so what it does is that it's going to take all this div and encapsulate that in another div. Okay, so to this guy, you can add a header with a class called as MDL layout underscore header. Okay, so into that, I'll add one more div with a class as MDL layout underscore header row to indicate that it's a row in the header part. So it's similar to your Bootstrap grid system. Okay, and then I'm going to add a span with a class called MDL layout title. Okay, let's give it a title called car deals. Okay, I'm going to add a spacer here by using the class called MDL layout spacer. Okay, now in order to provide navigation, I'm going to use a nav tag by providing it a class called MDL navigation. Okay, so here I'm going to add a button which is essentially to refresh the UI. Okay, so what I'm going to do is you can add multiple classes to this button to make it look as much better as possible. So we can add MDL button, MDL JS button, MDL button raised, MDL button accent, for example. Okay, so these are some of the classes that you could add to your button, and the text that I'm going to display here is called refresh. Okay, now let's see how does that look. You should see something on our browser. This is my title, and this is the button called refresh. Are we good until here? Guys, are we good until here? Gupta, Gautama, Del, Rihant, Sagnik. I'm sorry, Rishant. Sorry. Are we good until here? A yes or no, any queries? Okay, sure. Now that was about my heading part. Okay, now it's time that we code our body part. Thank you, guys. Okay, so let me add a main class here by calling it with the class as the main content that is going to be put in here. Okay, so I'm going to put all the details that I fetch in here. Okay, now I'll add a div with a class called MDL grid. Okay, so this is the place where my dynamic data is going to be fitted, right? So currently I don't have any dynamic data, so we'll come back to that. Okay, now I'm going to add a user-defined class called center. We'll just define that so that there is something that is appearing in the center of your web page, which is essentially a button. So I'm just going to copy the same button that I had defined on the top, and I'm going to add that here. Now, instead of refresh, I'm going to call it as show. Now what this button actually is going to do is it's going to make a call to the server and fetch some more results for you. Okay, now let's come back to our head part and type in that's because of the classes. So when I added this navigation, I put a spacer here. So if I remove the spacer, I get rid of that spacer. Okay, so it's going to be sitting right next to it. So that's the reason why I put a random spacer, and your MDL is intelligent enough to calculate that. and it is going to accommodate, it is going to evenly divide the components on your UI. Make sense? Okay. All right. So the thing that I'm missing here is currently the center, a class called center, which I use. So all that it is going to do is it's going to align the element on whatever you are applying this class to the center of your web page, like that. Okay, are we good until here? Okay, now this is going to be my app shell for now. Right? Now the next thing that I have to do is to talk to a server to get some details, right? So to get some information from my server, right? So for that, I found this link on the web, which is going to, okay, so if you want to change the colors and the backgrounds, all that you have to do is to change the classes. You need to learn the MD Lite, whatever classes are present in the Material Design Lite framework. Okay, so once you get accustomed to it, you should be easily able to change that. It is not necessary that you have to use MDL. I'm just using MDL because I found this a little new and most people not using it. So I've seen people using a lot of Bootstrap. I just took a little change and I was actually tired of using the same Bootstrap over years. Okay, so I just took a little change here. All right, so it's up to you. Whatever UI library you want to use, you can use. Okay, so this is a particular API that is going to return me the results of certain amount of cars in an array called cars. Okay, so it has got some details in it. So it has got a description, it has got details, ID, a title, a year, a brand, a model, some fields like that, and some image here. Okay, we may not be able to access this image, but still we'll try that. Okay, now this is my app shell. Now, do you guys remember what was the second terminology that I used? And I said that is something which is going to be the second important aspect. Yes. So I said we are going to design something called template. Right? Now, how do you design a template as? I'm going to use a script tag here. Okay, so I'm going to give the script tag a ID called car card. Okay, and I'm going to mention the type of this script as a template. Now, the thing is, when your browser encounters this, essentially, I'm going to put all the, see, the thing is very simple. When you are receiving the data, you have to put that in a certain HTML and only then display it to the user, right? So what is my template consisting of? My template is consisting of all that HTML. Now, if I would have put that template here without using the script, what would happen is my browser would render that HTML to me immediately. But I don't want my browser to read that HTML. So what I did is I put that in a script. Now you would say that, okay, when you put it in a script, it would execute that HTML. Or it would execute whatever JavaScript you put in there. So the reason I put text/template is my browser will not understand the type of script. It is not JavaScript. If I wouldn't have mentioned the type, by default it is text/JavaScript. But here I'm mentioning the type as text/template. So my browser is going to ignore that part for now. Okay. Now I can happily put all the HTML that I want to put in here. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a card type of a structure in order to display each of the cards that I have. Okay, so for that I'm going to take a div with a class called MDL card, MDL cell hyphen 4 hyphen call. MDL, I'm going to add a shadow effect to this one of a shadow 6 dB. Okay, and also I'm going to put in, so the use of text/template is your browser is not going to execute whatever is put in that script. If it would have been text/JavaScript, your browser will try to execute it. But anyways, I'm going to put all HTML here, so it's not JavaScript. So what will happen when it's trying to execute that script is that it's going to throw some errors. I don't want my browser to even understand what is written here. So that's the reason why I put something called text/template. Make sense? Yes, okay. Okay, so I'll just add a style to this guy with the property called, one moment guys, there is another question coming in. Fine, okay, thank you. The background image, okay, I'm going to read that image from the URL by using the URL, and the URL value is going to be held by a property called as image, which is defined in the input, which is defined in the data that is coming to us. So if you look at this one, there is a property called as image, which is nothing but, so let me open this up. Let me open this value here. You should see a small image of a car that is coming, right? So I'm going to use this placeholder and instruct my browser to replace this template image by whatever value I'm going to assign that. So let me change this to double quotes. I think we should be happy now. Okay. Now that is going to be setting my background. Now the next thing is I need a title. So I'll just use another div with a class called MDL card_title. Okay. I'll just put a class. Sorry. Okay, it's called MDL-card title text. Okay, and how am I going to display the title is, I'm going to use something called the title of the car or whatever it is, and then in the brackets, I'm going to display the price of it. Now, it is totally custom. You can use whatever favorite library you want to use in order to do this. Typically, you would use AngularJS or something. Okay. Cannot resolve file. Okay, that's fine. It's not able to resolve the file. That's because I did not. I do not have a local file setting, so it has to fetch that. Okay, so I'm going to add a couple of customization to my classes for the MDL card. What I'm going to do is I'll just change the cursor to a pointer. I'll just change the color to let's say white. Okay. And let's say we give it some height, and let's change the background size to cover. Now, what is the importance of the property called background size? Okay, think and tell me why do we use background size? Okay, in the meantime, I'll just style the title tag as well. Okay, so I'm going to use something called FFFF. Okay, I'll just change the background color to RGBA 0.5. Okay, I'll just change the padding to, let's say, random amount of 15 pixels, and I'll change the position to absolute, and I'll have the left value as 0. The bottom value as 0. The width, I'll just assign 100% to it. Okay, and to add a boxing effect, I'll just add a border box to that. Okay, all right, it's not exactly fitting in the image. So yes, I'm sorry, Del, that's correct. All right, I'm so sorry. Okay. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is to use another API. As I said, it's going to be part of your progressive web apps, and it's called as Fetch API. Okay. Now, what your Fetch API does is that it's going to help you fetch some resources over a network. Okay. So when you're going to talk to your server, you can use this API in the future in order to fetch the resources from your server side. But the problem is, as it says, this is an experimental technology. So which implies that your fetch API is not going to be supported by all your browsers, and so does your promises. So what do we do is which, if the browser is supporting that specific API, it is going to use it. Say, for example, I'm going to use something called ES6 polyfill. Okay, so I'll just go to this one, Stephen Penner's, a polyfill for ES6 style promises. So the promises that I'm going to implement are in the style of ES6. So the ES6 promises are not supported by all your browsers. So what I'll do is I'll use this ES6 API, and if the browser is supported, the ES6 promise will implement that ES6 promise. If not, it is going to fall back to some default implementation. Okay, now this is one thing. You can download it from your Git page. The other thing that I'm going to use is the fetch polyfill. Okay, so this is going to be the polyfill for the fetch API. If the fetch API is supported, because this is experimental, maybe that your user has not turned on the experimental features in any of the browsers. So if you go to your Chrome // flags in your Chrome browser, for example, there would be, this is a page where you can enable and disable the experimental features. Okay, so let's say if the user has not enabled an experimental feature while your browser vendor is working on developing it, your fetch API might not work. For example, I'm only talking about the fetch. Okay, so you could use this polyfill in order to substitute for the actual fetch API. Okay, now there is one more thing which is called as system.js, which is actually going to help you access the URL or the resources dynamically. So you can put this this library as well into your system. Okay, now I have all those resources downloaded already. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add script tags towards the end of my page in order to access all those resources. So I have files in resources /ES6-promise /ES6promise.js. That's one file. And the other file that I would like to include is resources /fetch/fetch.js. Now there is one more file that I would like to include, and that is resources I think it's system.js /system.js. Okay, now then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one more script which is called as app.js, and the way I'm going to import that is by using the system.js API, and I'm going to create that in the JS folder. I'm going to call it as app.js. Okay, so I could create a new directory here which is called JS, and in the JS folder I'm going to create a couple of files which are called app.js. I'm going to create one more file which is called carservice.js. Okay, now let's get back to our appservice.js. Okay, so how many of you have heard of modularization in JavaScript or modules in JavaScript, or how many of you have used AngularJS? Do you guys have idea about the JavaScript modules? Okay, so what happens is modules in JavaScript are actually a good way in which you can maintain your code. So every module that you create is independent of itself, and it could be used by some other modules. So for example, here I'm going to create a module called car service here. So how do I create a module? Yes, by using the define keyword. Okay. Now the define keyword takes define method takes two parameters. One is empty parenthesis, which you actually have to fill it if your if your module is dependent on some other module. So if your module is dependent on let's say an ABC module, then the name goes in here /abc.js, whatever it is. Okay, since I'm currently not dependent on anything, I'm going to stick to a blank array. Okay, so I'm going to define a variable called URL path, and I'll give this a value of the earlier JSON object that I just showed you. Okay, I'm going to also create another variable which is called API URL latest, and all that it is going to do is it's going to append a certain URL to it, and the URL is nothing but latest deals.php. Okay, now let's look at how do you actually use promises. So I'm going to define a method called load more request. Okay, and what this is going to do is it's going to use the fetch API to instruct that to go and fetch the results from the API URL. Okay, so it's going to go to the API that URL that is provided by this one, plus adding latest deals to it. So let me show you what does that exactly look like. Is this. Okay, it's going to fetch this result. Okay, and the way it is going to return the result to us is by using promises. Okay, now what is a promise? Okay, so promises are one way in which you can implement. Yeah, that's because I want to keep this actual URL a little generic. Okay, so we will just change the tail part of it, because when I'll try to fetch the details about a specific car, I'll have to just substitute this with the car ID, or I'll just have to append the car ID to this one. Okay, so that's the reason why I put this more generic. Okay, so a promise is nothing but a way in which you implement actually the AJAX concepts. In case of JavaScript, it's not totally AJAX, but it's similar to it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is whenever your fetch API fetches the results, it is going to return a promise. So you can use the then method in order to handle the resolve, in order to handle that promise. So it's going to give me a response. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to return the response in the form of a JSON. Okay, but this again is a promise. So I'm going to invoke another then method by passing in another function object, which is to be executed whenever the promise is to be resolved. And this is going to be having the data to it. So what we could just do it to log the data for now. We'll remove that logs very soon. Okay. Now that defines a small module for me. But the advantage of using a module is I can decide what to return and what not to return. Okay. So here I'm going to expose the method called load more request in the form of a method called load more request. Okay, now if there is another module, like for example, this app.js, which is going to be using, which is going to be actually requesting for this object, which is going to be using the car service, all that it has to do is to call service, car service dot load more request. Is that making sense? Okay, let me iterate. So what I did is I defined this car service as an independent module. Okay, and here this module could contain any number of functions. It could contain utility functions. It could contain any number of functions that you want to put. Okay, but it's up to me to decide which function is going to be exposed to the users and which function is not. Okay. Now, if there is another JavaScript that is using this service, then it has to invoke the method that is exposed by it. So I'm coincidentally calling the load more request method as load more request method. Remember, you need to return a JSON from a module. Okay, so if there is any other JavaScript that is trying to access this car service, so in that case, you can create an object of it and call the exposed method of it. Is that okay? Are we good until here? Any questions? So JSON is a data exchange format. Do you know XML? XML, extensible markup language. Okay, so what happens is when you are talking to the server, there has to be a certain format in which you exchange the data with it, right? So JSON is the latest format. We no longer use XML. It is supported, but it is not the most preferable way, right? So we use JSON. Okay, now I'll just invoke that here. Now let me go back to my, the reason I'm not able to, I'm not going to show this on the console is it potentially may not work. So let me do one thing. See, okay, so if I inspect the element and go to my console, there is an error here. Okay, so 404 not found. Okay, that's because I'll just substitute that with carservice.js. Okay, so if you see the result, it has returned an array which is fetched from that URL. Okay, and this log is because of this line. Okay, now what I'm going to do is, but this is not something we wanted. What did we want? We wanted to display the result that you get on the browser by using the card that we have created, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a file. Let me create the file first. Sorry, it's the JavaScript file. It's another module that we're going to create, which is called as template.js. Okay, and in that template.js, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm going to create a method called append cars. Okay, now let's look at the data that is actually passed to us. So the data that is getting that we are getting is an object. Now that object has a property called cars, which is an array. So I'm going to pass that cars to this guy like that. Okay. Now let's go to our template.js, and this is going to be yet another module for us. So I'll just define that to be another module. Okay, now what is the function that I'm using? It's called append cars, which is taking the cars as input. And what I'm going to do is let me create a variable called, an empty variable called card HTML. Okay, so I'm just going to iterate over each of those cars, and I'm going to append the result of another method which is called car card, which is nothing but it's going to take the value here. Okay, now let's create this method. Okay, so this is the one which is actually going to help us create the HTML for us. So what I'll do is I'll just take a car. Okay, now I need to get access to the template that I have defined. Right now, where did I define the template? I defined the template in the index.html here by mentioning it with the ID as car card. How do I fetch that car card? Is by using a query selector or document.getElement by ID. Okay, and I'm going to call the inner HTML for this one. Okay, now let's compose the title first. What is the title? It's the car.brand plus a space plus let's say car dot model plus a space plus a car dot year. Okay, so that's the title. Now if you look at our template, we have used some placeholders, right? So we have image, we have title, and we have price. So let's substitute them. How do you do that? Is by using replace, and I'm going to pass in the title by substituting the title with the value that I get from title. I'll call another replace now. Okay, so I'll just replace the image as well by calling it card.image. Okay, just a moment. I'll also replace the last property, which is the price, by using car.price. Okay, and then I'll just return the template object that I'm generated here. Okay, so it is going to generate a card for every car that we have in the array, right? Now we have the total HTML, right? Now the next thing that I have to do is I need to attach this HTML that I have composed to my index.html, or I have to put this generated HTML somewhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the grid and I'm going to call insert adjacent HTML method, and I'm going to append that HTML that is generated to my after the grid HTML, or after the div element with the MDL grid. Okay, so it is going to attach the result that is generated at the end of the list. Okay, now this is done. What is the next thing that we need to do? We need to expose this to the user, to other modules, right? How do we do that? Is by returning. So let's say I return something called append cars. Okay, I'm very sorry. It's supposed to be cars. Okay, so I'll just correct that typo real quick. Okay, now that is done. Now, in order for my other library to use this, which is the car service.js, it is dependent on the template.js, correct? Now I need to provide the path for the template.js file. Okay, and apart from that, I'll also need to pass in the template object, which is to be resolved at runtime. Okay, now let's see if we had made any progress here, and if we have any errors, let's fix that. Okay, so it's through an error which says bracket missing. Okay, just give me one moment, please. All right, so that is a problem. Let me pull this on a private window. Okay, we have some error here. Yeah, the error is here. Okay, so I'll just put that and come back to my index.html, open that up in the browser. Okay, all right, so at least we see the cards now, but there is some issue in substituting the prices. Let's see if we have actually made any error. Okay, the problem is with this image. Okay, there is one more error. Let's fix that. Okay, what is the error? Get localhost mesh. Okay. just a moment, guys. Let me fix that error before we move any further. Okay. Just a moment. I must have definitely done some typo somewhere. It says page start IMG 7070. Okay. This is my template. There is no much change here. We are pretty good. Okay, this is also fine. I'll just make sure that this is what is typed in here. Just give me 1 second, guys. Let's see if we have actually made any complex error, and then we should be able to fix that. Okay. Okay, we still have that error. Okay, especially because of something that we did wrong. So let me do one thing. No, we still have that error. Line 62. What is that on line 62? Okay, let me just go to the right. Now I got it. I think line 57. Yeah, I think this is the one which is causing the issues, but we are substituting that with the car.image. Okay, let's see. I just made some changes. Let's see if that is actually going to work for us. Yes. No, it did not. Okay, it's not working. Just a moment. Let's look at the URL that is generated. Sometimes these codes do not work whenever there are certain results that are put in the cache. So let me do one thing. Okay, it's not a problem with the cache. Do you guys see some error in my code here? This is the problem when I type in everything right from the scratch, right? There is something blocking us. Okay, this is all perfect. Right, let me do one thing. I'll just load a temporary project that I had created as a backup. I was pretty sure that this might fail and I might lose some time. So let me quickly load a project that I had as a backup. Now this essentially has the same code. Let me go to the browser here. Okay. So this is the expected output that you're supposed to get, but let's just compare if we had done any mistake in our code. Yeah, it's a location error. I might have done some typo that I was not able to see. All right, let me do one thing. I'll just revert. Okay, this is the output that I wanted to show you guys. Okay, so this is for the first 3 cars that you get. Okay, we did not add this one yet. We'll just add that now. Not necessary. Not necessary, because it's actually working without that. Okay, so let me talk about this one real quick. So this is the storage that you have, the service worker, the local storage or the session storage, and this is the index DB which we had, which I would create in order to support a offline application. We're just losing. We have another 20 minutes of time, so let me do a real quick introduction of the next steps that we're going to do. Okay, now the first thing is, after you get this kind of a display, so the thing is, on click of this button of the image, it is supposed to get some more details about the car. Okay, and if you click on that again, it should get closed. Something like that. Okay, now the other thing is, let's say the user has seen the first 3 results. This is when your progressive web apps come into picture. Let's say that your user has viewed a couple of them. Okay, let me do one thing. I'll just close this thing entirely. Let me open a new browser. Okay, let me open a private window. Okay, so I have a private window here. Now, if you look at it, first I'm loading in some dummy car here. Are you able to see that? So that's because of an SVG that I put here. Okay, so we just put an SVG here, because of which the car is being displayed. Instead of a total white background, we are displaying an SVG here. Okay. Now, once the loading has completed, that is, once the user has seen all the, once the result has been fetched, what we are doing is we are clearing that. Okay. Now, somebody asked me, why did I use this variable called API URL path? The reason is there is another extension of that URL, which is car.php followed by the ID of that car. Okay, so that is the reason why I put it as a generic URL. Okay, now once you click on that image, you are able to see all the details about a specific car. That is because of this URL. Okay, now what we have also done is, let me show you the place where we are actually clearing the SVG image that you see. Just a moment, where is my template? Let me go there. See, so you are actually able to see that dummy car because of this div, and the div has an ID called first load. Okay, now what I'm doing is, when you are calling this method called append car, I'm clearing the inner HTML of it, and that is why you see that vanish. And later we create this cart HTML as usual. That was the same code that we have written, and we are exposing that to our car service API. Okay, now that is one thing. Now, the other thing is, so let's say I'm going to inspect this. Okay, if you go to your application tab, you would see something called as an index DB. This is something which I do not want to discuss, because everybody has their own method of implementing a client storage. I use index DB. You might use a local storage, or you could use a session storage, which are part of your HTML. You could also use a less supported API, which is called Web SQL, or you could even use cookies. It's on your choice. Okay. Now, see this. There is some result that is already loaded into the client system. Okay. Now, I click on show more. It did not make a call to the server because I already have those results in my local DB here. Okay. Now, let's say the client is going offline. Okay, I go to the network tab and turn on the offline checkbox. Now, when I click on show more, even then it is going to show some results to the user. If I refresh, the network connectivity is gone. Right? Now, if I come online again and I refresh the page, you should be able to see the same result. And let's have a look at your key value pairs. This is all you have. Okay. Now, this has been achieved by using index DB, but the problem is even the index DB is not supported by all your browsers. So we use another polyfill, which is called local forge. What that does is it's going to fall back to session storage or local storage if your index DB is not supported by the browser. Okay, now before we end the session, I wanted to give you a little introduction about service workers. Okay, now this is your web app. Okay, and somewhere here is your server. Okay, now the service worker is a component that is sitting right between the web app and the server. What this does is that it could read a request, and depending upon that request, it can take a call, whether to call the indexed DB, whether to call the cache, okay, or whether to send that request directly to that server. Okay, now you implement this service. If you go to my code here, I'll show you how did I exactly implement it. I created a file called sw.js, which is my service worker object. Okay, so I used another API, which is called navigator.serviceworker, which is the core API for implementing service workers. Okay, we are not using any polyfill. We are using the browser's internal supported feature of service worker. If your browser is not supporting service worker, probably even if it is updated, it might not support, because you might not have turned on the experimental features, or you might not have turned on the service worker feature. So you need to Google around and see how do you turn on that service worker feature for the browser that you're using. If you're using Chrome, it is by going to Chrome://flags that you can turn on that feature. Opera and Firefox have got their own path where you can set that. Okay. Now, what happens is, for every request that your service worker is going to receive, it is going to determine if I can fetch that result from a local DB or index DB, or if I can fetch that result from a cache, or if I have to go talk to the server in order to get that result. Now, let's say it is going to talk to the server for the first time. Now, once it is talking to the server, it is going to return with a response, and it's going to put that response in your cache. Now, since your service worker is outside of your web application, it will not be able to access the DOM of your web app. And it is going to keep running in the backend. Even if you close your web app, you can still have a service worker run in the backend. There are some phases through which your service worker goes through. The generally used phases are install, and the other phases activate. Okay, now, okay, and let me just recollect if there is anything else that I can tell you about. Okay, so this was a little introduction to progressive web application. Now, let me tell you, how do you run the code that you have? Okay, now, once you go and download the API, the project, okay, so you should be able to see that project. Okay, it's just close to the time, so I'm just hurrying a little. So you could go to this folder here. Let me clear these PDFs, you don't need them. Okay, so go to this fifth stage, which is called as car deals. Okay, now let me just cd to that directory. Okay, and I call HTTP server on this one. Okay, now what I'll do is I'll go to my browser and type in localhost 88. Okay, so it is fetching the results. So it showed me that car thing, and if I click on show more, it's going to get me some more results. Show more, it's going to get me some more results like that. Okay, now let me go to inspect, and I'll turn off my network. Okay, even if I refresh now, my app still works. If I click on show more, it is still going to fetch those results, and this is because of the service worker implementation. Okay, even if you're going offline, see, it says clearly no connection because I'm turning off the network here, right? It is still able to fetch the results for me. If I refresh, it's going to act as if there is connection, but it is limited as expected because it is not connected to the network. So whatever data I already have in my local storage here, so if you look at the index DB key value pairs, whatever we have here, I have 9 results. So only the 9 results would be shown. Okay, I have 3 on the top, 3 on the bottom, and 3 in the middle. Okay, now you would ask me, how did you create this application to work on a mobile device? Okay, so I cannot show you the mobile device because I don't have an emulator, but yes, I can show you one thing. So if you go to, let's turn on the API, the network. Okay, now when you go to the application tab, there is a shortcut here in the manifest, which is called as add to home screen. Okay, this is similar thing that you would see on your mobile device as well. If you want to clarify that, go to this URL called bit.ly PWA car deals. Okay, this is the same example hosted there. Okay, try opening that in your mobile device. Okay, I'll tell you the URL again. It's bit.ly PWA car deals. Okay, do not open this in your browser. Open that in your app, in your mobile browser. Okay, Now, in your mobile browser on the top, if you are using Chrome, you would see an icon like that. Go to More Tools, or there would be an option to Add to Home. Okay, add that to your home, and you will see an icon on your desktop on your home screen. Click on that and look at how does that open up as an application. It is not going to open up as in the browser. Instead, it is going to open up as an application, similar to a mobile app. Okay. Now, in this case, because I'm using a desktop, I'll use this option called Add to Home. Okay. Now it says add this site to your shelf. I'll say add. Okay. I'll call it the best car deals. I'll click on OK. And here it is, the best car deals. So these are the other Chrome apps that are sitting on my browser. These are the other applications. Okay, so if I click on best car deals, it would take me to the URL that the application that we have just created. Is that clear? I know this is a very short time to explain a huge concept, but I did my best to explain you the best possibility I could. Okay, is everyone good with that? Sure. So you have access to that code. Work on it. Let me know if you have any questions. You can. Okay, so I covered introduction to the progressive web applications, and I tried to create a small web application by using the progressive technologies. Essentially by using modules and partly by using the storage. Yes. And internally, this application also uses service workers. But for that, I did not cover service worker. How do you code a service worker in detail? But yes, you can look into that code. That is pretty much straightforward. But I'm not sure if you'd be able to understand it. So just in case if you have any questions, do let the support team know. Okay, any questions about the webinar, the topic that we have discussed, the future of this topic, the future of front-end, how is the job market, any general discussion? If you want to know about the programs offered by Acadgild, some things, anything that you want to know in general, let me know. We still have 6 minutes to close the session. See, progressive web app is just a subset of front-end web development. Okay, so it's actually a overlapping thing on a front-end web development. So you have front-end, you have mobile development, and overlapping on both of that is your progressive web app. Oh, okay. So the thing is, progressive web app is going to get stable only when the APIs that you are going to use get stable. So progressive web app is just a methodology. The one such API that we are using is service worker. So service worker, when it gets finalized, that part of progressive web app is stable. It's not a framework or a library. Okay. Any further questions, or are we good to close for today? Sure, Vijay. Thank you so much for your time. I hope to see you in one of my batches soon. Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Gupta. Thank you so much, guys. Have a wonderful evening.